The same trail. Morning in Branthollow did not rise all at once. It seeped through cracks and shutters in a pale gray wash, touching roof lines first, then lanes, then the low mist gathered in the field beyond Elias's cottage. The village woke in layers. A cartwheel somewhere near the mill, a dog shaking water from its coat after a night under some wagon. The first cough of a banked fire stirred back to life. A woman's voice, sharp and practical, calling for a boy too slow with a bucket. Elias stood in the doorway of his cottage with his bow in one hand and the cold of spring not yet fully conquered by the sun sitting against his throat. The bed behind him was still new enough to feel like an argument every time he looked at it. Oak frame, wool mattress, linen sheet, a thing made not for survival, but for dignity. Sometimes he still woke in the dark with one hand spread against the slats beneath him, just to feel the proof that he had built something in this world which answered to more than need. That morning, though, comfort did not change arithmetic. Winter stores had thinned. Fresh greens were beginning to show, but not enough to matter. Coin was always temporary. Meat kept a man breathing and bargaining at once. So he had risen before the light fully committed itself, checked the edge on his knife, tested the bowstring for damp, and tied a strip of smoked rabbit in cloth for the walk. If he was fortunate, he would bring back something worth the effort. Deer would have been ideal. A boar less so. Rabbits were too little now to justify the hours. The season sat in that frustrating space where the body wanted abundance before the land had agreed to provide it. He stepped off the threshold and pulled the door shut behind him. The lane at the edge of Branthollow still carried the memory of mud from old rain, though the upper layer had gone dry enough to crack under his boots. He took the narrow path that bent away from the village fence and into the trees, following the route he had come to know not by ownership, but by repetition. Every hunter in Branthollow claimed a knowledge of the woods. Most of them knew only the places they had already succeeded in. Elias had learned, mostly through failure, that the forest changed its mind daily and preferred people who noticed that. The first mile held only the usual language of morning. Bird movement in the lower brush, fresh scrape marks on one pine where deer had rubbed antlers weeks ago, the smell of wet earth warming slowly, a fox track old enough to soften at the edges, no clean hoof print recent enough to trust. He moved without haste. That had been one of the hardest things to learn in this world, perhaps because his old one had trained haste into nearly everything. Hurry to work, hurry home, hurry between obligations, hurry through meals, hurry through the little spaces in which life might otherwise have noticed itself. Out here, speed only proved that a man cared more about his own expectation than the pace of what he pursued. So he let the forest set the rhythm. Up a low rise where the roots knuckled through the soil, down into a strip of softer ground where runoff had once cut channels and left them half filled with dark leaves, across a game trail too stale to matter, past the broken remains of an old snare someone had set badly enough to catch nothing but weather. The first real sign came near the edge of a ferned hollow where the undergrowth had been rooted up in long, torn streaks. Elias crouched. Boar. The ground had been disturbed hard and recently. Wet soil turned, stones shoved loose, one half-rotted stump ripped open and left to show its pale interior. He touched the edge of the track with 2 fingers. Fresh. Not this morning fresh, but close enough that the shape of the print still held sharply where the earth should have crumbled. A large one, heavy through the shoulder, moving slow when it passed here, perhaps feeding, or perhaps restless. He studied the direction of the gouges, eastward, toward thicker cover and beyond it, the stream-cut ground where animals sometimes ran if startled because the bank gave them a narrow advantage against pursuit. He straightened slowly. A boar was not ideal. A wounded boar was worse. A cornered one could open a man from thigh to hip in a single bad heartbeat. The village hunters loved telling those stories in winter, usually while showing scars no one had asked about and accepting praise no one had volunteered. Still, meat was meat. Fat mattered. Tusks could be sold. Hide had uses. And a man who turned away from good meat because it came with risk usually did not remain fed long enough to grow principles worth defending. He shifted the bow in his grip and moved on. The second sign did not belong to the boar. He nearly missed it. A broken switch of hazel, bent but not snapped. A careful cut through one trailing vine rather than a clumsy push. Two faint impressions in softer ground beside a narrow stand of alder where no animal heavier than a fox should have left such tidy depth. Human, light, deliberate. He stopped. Another hunter. The realization tightened something in him, not from anger, but from recalculation. Brenthalo men hunted this far, though not often when the ground was still unpredictable from thaw. Whoever it was moved quietly. Better than most. Better than old Baron, certainly. Better than the miller's eldest. Better than Elias himself, perhaps, if the branch had not been cut at exactly the angle the light happened to catch. He crouched again and looked more closely. Narrower boot than most men wore. Stride length measured, not long. Weight carried well. He did not immediately think of Mira. Villages teach themselves categories, and even when a man mistrusts them, he is not always quick enough to keep their habits from slipping into his first assumptions. Hunter meant man in Brenthalo more often than not. But as he followed the sign farther, the shape of the movement unsettled that easy conclusion. Whoever walked here did so with the strange combination of caution and certainty that belonged either to someone very experienced or to someone long accustomed to going alone because company had never bothered to learn their pace. He thought of the woman people still lowered their voices to mention despite months having passed since he first began hearing her name. Mira, the one who gathered herbs from the tree line. The one who lived beyond the village in the old abandoned hut until even those willing to scorn her had to admit she had not died quickly enough to satisfy their predictions. The one people described with all the usual village laziness reserved for those who did not stand in the center of its approval. Strange, quiet, wild, too knowing, too alone. He had seen her before, of course, not closely. A figure at market with a hood shadowing her face and a bundle of dried greens tied at her hip. A shape slipping between trunks at the forest edge before dawn. A pair of eyes once, very steady, when he had looked up from loading venison at the butcher's stall and found himself being measured by someone who did not seem interested in hiding the fact. He had never spoken to her, not because he shared the village's talent for making exile into entertainment. Mostly because their paths had not yet required speech. Perhaps this morning intended to fix that. The trail narrowed where the land dipped. Alder roots thickened the ground. Water moved somewhere ahead unseen but audible in the low, stony murmur of stream against bank. Elias slowed further, stepping where old moss or bare root would carry less sound than leaf mold. The boar had passed here recently enough that the scent of torn earth still hung in the air. Then he saw her, not all at once. A shadow first between trunks, then the angle of a shoulder, then a hand lifted, two fingers spread slightly in the universal language of hold still. He stopped before he had fully decided to trust the instruction. Mira was crouched half behind a fallen cedar 30 paces ahead. She wore a faded cloak the color of bark after rain, the hood thrown back enough to show dark hair bound away from her face, and the sharp, alert stillness of someone listening through the whole body, rather than just the ears. A short hunting spear rested in one hand. A bow lay beside her in the grass, already strung. Her eyes moved to him and did not widen, so she had known he was there before he saw her. That should have bothered him. Instead, it produced something closer to respect. For a few breaths, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice pitched low enough not to carry beyond the cedar, she said,
"You're on my wind."
He blinked once, not because the sentence was unclear, because it was the first thing she had ever said to him, and it contained no greeting at all. He adjusted 2 steps to the left without argument. Her gaze stayed on him long enough to confirm he understood. Then she turned back toward the thicket ahead. Only then did he see the boar. Not clearly. Movement mostly. A dark shift between brush stems, the heavy arc of a shoulder, one ear twitching above the fern line. It was larger than he had hoped and leaner than he liked. Spring hunger showed in the restlessness of its rooting. A scar cut pale across one flank, old enough to have healed and deep enough to suggest it had survived something that had wished to eat it. Mira spoke without looking at him.
I tracked it from the north ridge.
He kept his own eyes on the brush. I picked it up in the hollow.
It circles if pressed.
You've seen it before.
Yes.
That said more than most people would have managed in a paragraph. He understood the rest himself. A known boar. Not easy. Dangerous enough to remember. Worth hunting anyway because meat and tusk and hide were worth danger in the sort of lives both of them apparently lived. The boar shifted again, snout turning toward the stream. Mira set the spear down soundlessly and reached for her bow.
If it breaks left,
She said.
there's a gully it likes. Narrow, steep-sided, bad footing near the bottom.
You want to drive it there?
I want it choosing where it thinks it survives.
The line almost sounded like humor. Almost. Elias glanced at her. There was dirt at one knee of her trousers, a scratch across the back of one hand, and no sign at all of the village-made strangeness people enjoyed dressing her in when they ran out of better stories. She looked like what she was, a hunter crouched over dangerous game, deciding how to bring it down with the least chance of getting opened for the effort. He found himself trusting her plan immediately. Then what? She drew one arrow from the quiver at her back and set it to string.
Then we stop being polite.
That time, he almost smiled. He lifted his own bow. Split the carcass? He asked. Her eyes flicked to him again. There it was at last, the first real measure. Not surprised that he would ask. Surprised that he would ask before claiming first right by being man, villager, buyer of legal habits, or any of the other flimsy authorities people liked to drape over greed.
Yes,
She said.
if you don't ruin it.
I was about to say the same. One corner of her mouth moved, not a smile, but enough to count as the shadow of one. Then the boar raised its head fully, and both of them stopped being people with a conversation available to them. Mira moved first. She whistled once, sharp and cutting from behind the cedar. The boar startled, spun, and bolted not left, but straight toward the stream. Elias rose with it, already moving downslope to cut the angle. Brush slapped his legs. Fern heads snapped under his boots. Behind him, he heard Mira circling wider and faster, keeping pace without crashing noise into the trees the way a less disciplined hunter would have. The boar burst through the scrub, huge, black-backed, mud-caked at the shoulder. Elias had time for one clean breath and one measured shot. He loosed. The arrow struck too far back. Not uselessly, but not enough. The boar screamed. It was a sound neither fully animal nor fully anything language should try to keep. It veered hard to the right, then down, exactly as Mira had predicted, toward the gully where the bank narrowed and the footing turned treacherous for anything too heavy to trust itself. Elias ran. He heard Mira somewhere above him, her movement light and fast on the ridge line. The gully opened suddenly ahead. The earth cut steep where spring water had eaten it year after year into a narrow, twisting trough of stone, root, and churned mud. The boar hit the descent too quickly, slid, recovered, and turned in fury at the bottom, foam and blood bright at its mouth. Mira appeared on the left bank and sent her arrow down. It struck the shoulder, better than his. The boar bellowed and charged not up the bank toward her but sideways, looking for the weaker climb, toward Elias. There are moments when fear arrives too quickly to be emotion and becomes only information. The bank gave under his left boot. The ground at the lip was worse than it looked. The boar was faster uphill than anything that size had a right to be. His second arrow would not be quick enough if he tried to knock while retreating. He dropped the bow and reached for the knife instead. It would not have been enough. Mira moved before he finished the thought. She came down the bank on his right, like something thrown rather than something that had chosen its own footing. One boot hit root, slid, corrected. The spear drove low and hard, just behind the boar's foreleg as it lunged. The impact turned the charge. Not fully, but enough. The tusk ripped through Elias's trouser leg and scored his calf instead of taking the whole muscle open. He went down anyway. Mud, breath gone, knife in one hand. The boar thrashed, half trying to turn on Mira, half trying to finish what it had started toward him. Blood pumped darker now from shoulder and side. Elias rolled, came up on one knee, and drove the knife where the neck met the chest in the only opening the fury gave him. The boar convulsed once, then again, then stopped. Silence took the gully in a sudden ugly drop, broken only by all three of them breathing as if the world had become something to bite through. Mira was the first to move. She put one boot against the boar's shoulder and wrenched the spear free with both hands. Blood slicked the shaft. She stepped back immediately, not from fear, but from long practice. Animals that look dead and animals that are dead have ended many men by exploiting the softness between those two conditions. Elias waited through 3 more breaths. No movement. Only then did he lower the knife. His calf burned. Not deep, he thought. The boar had more glanced and torn than taken hold. Enough to sting, enough to bleed, not enough to lame him if treated properly. Mira looked at the leg, then at him.
You're cut.
So are you. Only then did he see the line torn through her sleeve near the shoulder, where brush or tusk or sheer bad luck had taken cloth and skin together in passing. She followed his gaze and said,
Surface.
Mine too. They stood there over the dead weight of the boar, while the gully slowly accepted the fact that its violence had ended. Then Mira leaned the spear against the bank and said,
Good.
It was such a practical word for what had just happened that Elias laughed once before he meant to. The sound startled both of them. Maybe because it did not belong naturally in a blood-wet gully. Maybe because neither had expected the other to be capable of it so quickly after near ruin. Mira's eyes narrowed slightly.
What?
Nothing. He wiped the knife on the grass nearest him and pushed himself fully upright. You chose a terrible place to be correct. Her gaze dropped to the dead boar, then to the gully walls, then back.
And yet?
He almost smiled again. They worked in silence first because work came before reflection in that kind of morning. The boar needed bleeding properly before the meat began losing more than the chase had already cost it. The gully gave bad footing for butchering, so they hauled the body together to flatter ground beside the stream where water ran cold and clear over stone. It took both of them. The animal was dense with lean muscle and old fight, the kind of weight that reminded a person exactly how much of hunting occurs after the kill and why stories told by men at tables rarely respect that part enough. By the time they had it positioned, both of them were streaked with mud and blood. Elias cut first. Mira held the hind leg steady without being asked. That, more than anything so far, made the work between them feel strange in a way he could not yet name. He had butchered with other hunters before, in groups, at village tables, beside men who spoke too loudly and treated the dead animal like a competition that continued after breath had left it. This was different, cleaner somehow. No wasted motion, no unnecessary comments. No performance. Just 2 people who understood that respect for the body on the ground was one of the prices paid if the body on your own side of the exchange was to keep breathing with any dignity. When he opened the carcass, Mira reached in first for the organs with the sure efficiency of someone who had done this often.
Liver's clean.
She said, Keep it.
We split everything.
You put a spear in it,
You put a knife in it.
and you kept it from opening me. Her hands paused once in the work, then continued.
We split everything.
She said again, but the line landed differently now. Less transaction, more principle. All right. The stream took the blood they washed from their hands and knives and gave it no ceremony. Sun climbed by degrees, finding them where the gully opened into broader forest. Birds returned one species at a time, as if news of danger had to travel through separate councils before permission for song resumed. They quartered the boar cleanly. Mira's cuts were efficient and neat, favoring preservation. Elias's were heavier but strong, favoring transport. Together they produced something better than either probably would have alone. He noticed small things while they worked. The scar at her temple he had only half seen from a distance before. The way she kept her weight slightly more on one foot when still, as if some old injury resented cold mornings. The steadiness of her hands, even when blood made the knife slick. The fact that she did not speak to Phil quiet, and did not seem threatened when he left it alone between them. At last, the carcass lay reduced to useful order. They split the meat evenly, or tried to. Mira set one shoulder cut toward his pile. He moved it back. The fat is better on that side, he said.
You need fat.
So do you.
I know how to make lean cuts last.
So do I,
You smoke meat.
she said.
That is not the same as knowing how to make lean last.
He looked at her properly then. She met the look without flinching. What do you do?
Different herbs. Lower drying heat. Less salt than the village uses. More air.
She wiped the knife once on grass already darkened beyond caring.
If you overdry lean meat too fast, it hardens before it keeps.
Elias felt a small, precise shift inside him. Recognition. Not the loud kind men in taverns perform when they meet someone useful and begin at once measuring gain. Something quieter. The realization that the village had been careless with a person worth learning from. He nudged the shoulder cut back toward her pile anyway. You saved my leg. She considered that, then reached across and moved one of the better ribs to his side in return.
There.
He accepted the trade. The balance felt right enough to stop arguing. They built carrying poles from cut saplings and lashed the loads with green vine and cord. By then the work had moved from butchery into that slower phase of shared labor where exhaustion becomes familiar enough to stop requiring comment. Each of them took half. Each of them carried more than comfort would have advised because 2 trips would have wasted daylight. They started toward the village path by the route that gave easiest footing under weight. The forest sounded different carrying meat, not louder, sharper. Crows noticed first, then smaller scavengers shifting in the brush, the long unease that follows blood even after the hunt has been earned cleanly. Mira walked ahead by a few paces where the trail narrowed, then beside him where it widened again. The load on her shoulder did not seem to alter her stride much, though he noticed, now and then, the slight tightening at the mouth that admitted the weight more honestly than posture did. At the stream crossing, she stopped first and set the pole down. He did the same. For a while, they only knelt and washed the blood from their arms. The water bit cold enough to numb fingertips almost immediately. Mira broke the silence.
You apologize to it.
Elias looked over.
To the deer?
She asked.
I heard you once, near the Eastern Trail. You thought no one was there.
He sat back on his heels. You were.
Yes.
The answer held no accusation, only fact. He looked at the current sliding over stone. On Earth, meat came already dead.
Earth.
He almost corrected himself, then didn't. It was strange hearing the words spoken aloud between them. Stranger still that he had offered it without calculation. My world, he said, before here. She rinsed blood from the spear tip with her thumb and the side of her palm.
I know what you meant.
He waited. After a moment, she added,
People say you came from nowhere, that you speak like someone who learned our words in a dream.
people say things when they don't know enough.
That doesn't stop them.
No. She lifted the spear from the water and looked at him sidelong through damp strands of hair the chase had loosened.
You still apologized.
He thought about refusing the conversation on principle. Instead, he said, "It died because I needed it to.
That's hunting.
It's still death." She was quiet for a while after that, not withdrawn, thinking. Then she said,
Most men here thank the kill because thanking makes them feel cleaner than need.
"And you?"
I butcher quickly.
That should have sounded cold. It didn't. It sounded like someone who had stopped dressing survival in more ceremony than it deserved. He understood that too. They rose and took up the poles again. The village path split near a stand of pine where the trail bent one way toward the outer cottages and another toward the tree-lined huts beyond, where Branthollow's approval weakened into something meaner and more convenient. They stopped there because stopping was now unavoidable. This was where the hunt ended, where shared burden stopped pretending it had no edge, where village logic would separate what the forest had allowed to travel as one. Mira lowered her end of the pole first. So did he. For a few breaths, neither reached immediately for their divided share. The pause felt stranger than anything yet, not because either of them wanted speech badly enough to invent it, because both of them now knew the morning had altered something, and the alteration did not yet have a shape they could carry home in the same straightforward way they carried meat. Mira untied one of the herb bundles from her belt. It was small, dry leaves and needle-fine stems wrapped in cloth.
Juniper and bitter leaf.
She said, holding it out.
Pound it with a little salt. Pack it around the lean cuts before you hang them.
He looked from the herbs to her face. It'll keep longer?
If you don't smoke it too hot.
He took the bundle. Their fingers touched only briefly, but the contact seemed to hold more weight than the boar had. "Thank you," he said. Her expression shifted by one almost invisible degree, as if gratitude from him landed somewhere she had not decided whether she trusted yet.
It's practical,
She said. He almost laughed at that because it sounded too much like both of them. So was the spear. She looked down once at the blood-dark line on his trouser where the tusk had scored through.
You should wash that again before night.
"You too."
Yes.
He adjusted the meat bundle onto his shoulder. She did the same. Then, as if the morning had not already moved far enough off the track she usually trusted, Mira said,
If you build a drying rack outside the cottage, don't use green pine for the cross pieces. It weeps too much in late sun.
Elias stared at her. It took him a beat to understand what had happened. She was not only giving him advice, she was speaking into his future work, as though some part of her expected there to be one he might allow her knowledge to touch. "I wasn't planning to," he said.
That wasn't an answer.
"No," he admitted. "It wasn't." The corner of her mouth moved again, that near smile that never seemed interested in being watched too closely. Then she turned toward the tree-lined path, he toward the village road. After 6 steps, he looked back. She had too, only once, only for a moment. Then both of them kept walking. The village received the boar as villages always receive meat and the people who carry it, with quick interest, faster accounting, and more commentary than the labor deserved. By the time Elias reached the butcher's yard with the smaller share slung on one shoulder and the rest already thinking ahead in his hands, Old Baron had 3 opinions about the weight, 1 question about where it was taken, and an immediate desire to know why only half the carcass had come into town.
"Split the rest."
The cooper asked from where he stood shaving a stave near the wall. "Yes."
"With who?"
Elias untied the bundle and laid the meat on the table. A better hunter than you. That bought him silence long enough to count as victory. He sold only what he had to, kept the best of his share, took coin for the cuts he could afford to lose, bought coarse salt, 2 onions, and a little lamp oil with part of it. The herb bundle from Mira he kept tucked inside his coat where damp wouldn't ruin it. By the time he carried the rest home, the day had gone amber at the edges. He laid the meat out on the cottage table, checked the cut on his leg, cleaned it, packed the lean strips with the juniper and bitter leaf exactly as she had said, hung them where the air moved best through the room. The scent changed almost immediately. Sharper, cleaner, less like raw blood waiting to sour and more like something already turning toward keeping. He stood there in the middle of his cottage with the evening lowering outside and realized the place felt altered by an absence. Not by missing meat, not by pain in his calf, not even by the knowledge that the next few days would now be full of cutting, hanging, salting, smoke, and the practical gratitude of not going hungry. The room felt altered because someone had stood inside the shape of his day and matched him without asking permission to diminish herself for it. He set the remaining shoulder cut on the table and thought of Mira in the gully, spear low, voice level, saying we split everything as if fairness were simply another kind of knife she carried and knew how to use. He thought of her warning about green pine cross pieces, of the herb bundle in his hand, of the look she had given him when he said thank you. Outside, the last light withdrew through the trees. Inside, Elias ran one thumb over the rough cloth wrapping of the juniper and bitter leaf before setting it carefully on the shelf above the table. Not hidden, not displayed, only kept. The cottage was still his, the bed still his, the walls still his, the labor of every board and joint and choice still something he had earned alone. And yet, when he looked at the drying strips now beginning their slow transformation under her advice, it no longer felt entirely true to say the day had belonged only to him. That should have unsettled him more than it did. Instead, he found himself listening for the forest beyond the walls, as if some part of him half expected to hear again the sound of another hunter moving there with the same quiet certainty. When no sound came, he banked the lamp, cleaned the knife one final time, and lay down on the bed he had built. The mattress took his weight. The cottage settled around him. And while sleep came slowly, as it often still did in this world, the last clear thought he held before it finally crossed the threshold was not of the boar, nor of the village's questions, nor even of the cut in his leg. It was of the moment at the split path when Mira had offered him knowledge about a drying rack he had not yet built, as if she had already begun imagining the shape of his work after today. That, more than the hunt itself, remained. Not because it was softer, because it was stranger, and because some quiet part of him already knew that men do not remember a morning only for the kill if the more dangerous thing they brought back from the woods was trust.